Meg Waite Clayton has published 3 novels, including The Wednesday Sisters, set in Eleanor Pardee Park. She moved to a community center in 2002, where she lives with her husband, 2 sons, and a literarily named dog, Frodo. Meg, you wrote a book called The Wednesday Sisters, set in Palo Alto, but you didn't grow up here. Can you tell me where you did grow up and how you came to live in Palo Alto?
I had a very peripatetic childhood. I was born in Washington, D.C. I then moved all over the place. I lived in Kansas for a while when I was young. I lived in the Chicago area for most of my school years. I lived in Los Angeles for a little bit. Went to Michigan for law school. My family lived in New Jersey for a while I was in college. I went to Los Angeles out of law school and worked practicing law there for a number of years. Went from there to Baltimore, went from Baltimore to Nashville, Tennessee, and then ended up in Palo Alto just about the time that I was going to start writing that book. I literally sold The Language of Light, my first novel, the day that we moved into the Palo Alto house. So that was very exciting. But writing The Wednesday Sisters was very much, for me, a process of learning about Palo Alto myself. So in many ways, I am Frankie in that book. I moved into town and knew nothing about the town or the people here, and had a delightful time coming to learn about and love Palo Alto.
You did a lot of research, as you just said, in preparation for The Wednesday Sisters, working with Steve Steiger, right? From
Yes.
The Palo Alto Historical Society.
Steve Steiger was absolutely an amazing resource, and the whole Palo Alto Historical Archives were wonderful. The photos there, the clips of newspaper, there's so much information there. The book would be a completely different book without that resource. It was truly amazing.
What was it like for you, sort of mixing fact and fiction? I know walking by Eleanor Pardee Park, where the book takes place a lot. There is, in fact, a house with pink shutters across from the park, but I know there are other parts of the book that are not based in fact. How do you weave fact and fiction?
I'm going to back up and tell you a funny thing about the house with the pink shutters, which is that when I first realized that was there was when some book club that I was visiting, more than a year after the book had been out, because it was already out in paperback, said, "Oh, we saw the house with the pink shutters." And I said, "The house with the pink shutters? Oh my God, you're kidding." Because I had been very careful when I did the house to not make it anybody's house, so that people, in the unlikely event that I was wildly successful and people started making pilgrimages to the places where my books were set, that it wouldn't be anybody's particular house. The house that Frankie lives in is actually a split level, which is pretty unusual in Palo Alto. I don't know that they exist. It's much more typical of one of the houses that I lived in when I was young. And the pink shutters were just something I thought about. Frankie's house originally was on Channing. And it was in doing the research and finding that the old mansion, the Dixon mansion, that is the mansion that is in the park, was facing Channing right when the book was about to go to print, that I realized that Frankie's house was on the wrong street if it was going to be across from the Dixon mansion. So I moved it around to Channing, and it never occurred to me to check to make sure that there wasn't a house. Moved around to Center. It never occurred to me to make sure there was a house. There was no house with pink shutters there.
Well, I made a pilgrimage to the house.
But it's very fun to mix fact and fiction. The one thing I love about Palo Alto is people know the community here and know the history here. So if you get it wrong, they're going to tell you that you've gotten it wrong. So it was very important to me that I get as much of it right as I could. No doubt there are still things wrong.
So you've always you've written 3 books. One of which is coming out in paperback very soon, The Language of Light, and The Wednesday Sisters you were just talking about, and then your most recent, The For Ms. Bradwell's. But you were a lawyer in a former life. So how did that transformation take place?
I went to law school because I didn't really know what to do. It was never my dream to be a lawyer. I was a history and psychology major in college. I had wanted to be a writer, but in the way that people have secret dreams that they never talk about. For me, writing was something people did who could leap tall literary buildings in single bounds, and I know that wasn't me. English was probably the only the only subject that I did not AP in high school, and I took the minimum in college that I could, so that was not my strength. I went on to law school, and I practiced law for a number of years, and it was a late night conversation with my husband, actually, where he asked if there was anything else I wanted to do in my life. And I said, in my wildest dreams, and he said, yeah, and I said, I'd like to be a novelist. But how am I going to, I have no reason to believe that I could do that. And he said, how are you going to know if you don't give it a try? And it got me thinking. And he said, in a very nice way, you're not getting younger, none of us are, and perhaps it's time to think about whether that's something you really want to do or not. And so I did, and I left the practice of law not too much after that and started writing, and it's been a lovely experience. I can't imagine enjoying life more than I enjoy it now.
So what is a day in the life? What's your routine? I'm sure it varies depending where you are in the life cycle of a book, but what's your routine? My
writing routine is pretty simple and astonishingly boring. What started writing when I was a new mom, pretty much. My older son was 2, and my younger son was a newborn. So as a young mom, I wrote in all the spaces I could. Much like Frankie and the Wednesday sisters, I wrote at the steering wheel of my car if Chris was off to preschool and Nick fell asleep in the car as I was taking him. I wrote it. I can do 6 hours at Chuck E. Cheese because I could in the day, because my kids had the little armband on and they were having a good time. And I could write and not worry about them. Just feed them the little tokens when they came from our tokens, and all worked well. So my routine is built on that motherhood. When my children started going to school full time, I seized that time for myself, and I said, this is going to be my writing time. I am not doing the laundry. I'm not paying bills. I'm not answering the phone during that time. I sit down at 8, which is when they started school back in the day. They're both in college now, and I work until 2. And my rule is actually 2,000 words or 2 o'clock. If I get 2,000 words by 9 o'clock, I can eat bonbons all day if I want. I can watch Oprah. I can do anything I want. Although if I get 2,000 words by 9 o'clock, I'm really probably not going to get out of the chair, because that'd be a really good writing day. So it's very boring. I sit down and I write, and I make myself do it. And the beauty of that is that it's not an option. And so the hardest part for me is sitting down to do it every day, and that takes that hardness out of it.
The Wednesday Sisters is about Palo Alto and about aspiring writers, obviously, and The Form is Bradwell's is about women lawyers. Can you, and in each of these, it's about female friendships and long-standing ones. Can you just talk about a little bit about where that theme comes from for you?
The theme of friendship is one I feel really passionately about, I will say. I had very good friends my whole life, but particularly in law school. My law school friends really helped me become who I am in a way that I have been ever grateful for. They gave me a confidence that I didn't have going into law school, and that was a real gift. And so when I wrote The Wednesday Sisters, really that experience was like wrapping myself up in the warm blanket of those friends every morning when I sat down to write. And that's a really lovely place to write from. So when I was thinking about a third book, Random House said, yeah, that friendship thing, that worked pretty well. Would you like to do that again? And so I thought, well, sure, in a different setting, different context, different story, that might be nice to do again.
You're in a book club here in your neighborhood, and I'm curious about what it's like to be in a book club as a writer and as an author. In the back of books, there are book club notes and suggested conversation topics. And what did those seem like to you as a writer? And do they seem removed from what you were actually thinking when you were writing your books? I'm just curious about that dynamic.
I love my book club to start with. It's really brought our neighborhood together in a way that we had moved into the neighborhood not too long before the book club formed. Somebody had the idea of forming a book club. It was about the time when my first novel came out, actually. And so these were people who knew me before I was a published novelist, some of them, and others who knew me knew me before they realized that I was a writer for the most part. So they just think I'm Meg, which of course I am. And you know, I had the opportunity to study with Alice McDermott, who is a wonderful writer. She's won the National Book Award, and she also belongs to a neighborhood book group, and she talks about how nice it is just to be a neighbor. So I really enjoy that aspect of it.
And you've been touring. I mean, for all these books, you've been around the country, going to bookstores, talking with people who are readers, who may be writers themselves. How do you see Palo Alto as different or not different from other communities? So many writers here, so many educated, highly educated people, well-read people. Do you see any difference, or do you sort of see it as surprisingly similar?
The one way that Palo Alto is a little bit different is that it is an environment that's very rich in people doing creative things. And I think part of the reason for that is that it is an environment of possibilities. It's a place where 16-year-olds can start companies in garages. And so the idea that you can be a writer is pretty easy if you can be a billionaire when you're 16. So there are some really, really wonderful writers here, and that is one part of living in Palo Alto that I absolutely love.
So it's that kind of marketplace of ideas and of people doing things that are new and creative.
You look at different points in history, you know, Paris in the 20s, for example. And I think part of the reason that so many writers were in Paris in the 20s are because people were writing in Paris in the 20s, and you could talk about it, and when you can talk about it with somebody who's doing it, it just makes it seem possible.
So picking up on the idea, where do your ideas come from? Some obviously from your publisher, some from an abiding interest, but how about detail or, you know, characters? Where do they come from?
The hardest part for me in writing is the starting, and this idea that you have to have a concept for a novel, that when you sit down to write, you have to know what it is you're going to write about. I would never start writing if I had to know what my book was going to be about the moment I sat down writing. I think it's very much like running a marathon. You know, you don't walk out the door when you've never run before and say, okay, I'm going to run 26.2 miles today, I'm going to start right now. You run a little bit, and then you rest for a few days, and then you run a little bit further, and then you rest. And after some period of time, you can put together a whole marathon. One, perhaps not two.
I'm in that category.
Yeah, me too. So writing a novel is very like that. I start everything in my journal, and I'm just journaling for myself. And it's very liberating because I don't have to think that this is going to be some great thing that's going to sit on the shelf next to, you know, Cormac McCarthy or wherever you sit on the shelf. You're just writing for yourself. And what I find is that when I start writing, ideas come, they bubble up from your subconscious, and you are often delightfully surprised at what shows up on the page that you didn't know was there. That having been said, I'd use a lot of prompts. I keep photographs around. I have a lovely photographer friend whose name is Adrienne Defendi. She gave me a photo on a card that she made for me for my 50th birthday, and I keep that on my desk because it's just a picture of trees in a mist. But it's very evocative, and it makes you think. Every time you look at it, it makes you think, and it just stimulates my creativity in ways that just, you know, sitting there and thinking, what am I going to write about today, just doesn't do. I don't ever, if I'm describing somebody's eyes, I don't close my eyes and think, okay, what would these blue eyes look like? I find a picture in a magazine of blue eyes, or I find somebody I know who has blue eyes, and I look into them, and I describe them.
So it's a lot of observing and then capturing those details.
It is very much in the way I write, anyway, in the details of what I am describing. It is very much observing. I observe everywhere. If you are having coffee near me in a coffee shop, beware, because if you say something interesting, I will write it down. I'm a notorious eavesdropper. The story then, I do not borrow stories from real people's lives. I like to say that my friends are very good friends, and I want to keep them that way. My family, you know. No, so I try not to borrow from people's lives, but if you pull the details, it gets you thinking in ways that help you develop the story. And often I pull stories from lines from letters or pictures I've seen in photographs, or just all sorts of things can provoke a story. Some parts of my story are little pieces of my life that are embedded in there. Some of them I will own up to, many of them I will not.